I'm Bill Simpson, and this is a mind map that summarizes content that was placed in a copyright glossary by students in the Vancouver Community College EDUC 4152 class. Though much of the information is general in nature about copyright, the material summarized here is primarily focused on images and art, and the copyright laws that I'm talking about are for US and Canada. A word of caution: copyright is a complicated issue and is continually changing. In addition, not all content and resources in this video have been verified by me. I'm simply summarizing content that was found by others. However, the information in this video can be good as used as a starting point in your own research. Remember, you're the one who's ultimately responsible for the correct use and application of copyright laws. So what is copyright? Well, it's mostly about the ownership of the image that was created. It's the right to reproduce, prepare derivatives, distribute copies, perform the work, and display the work. But it also balances the right of these exclusive owners and the public's interest. Copyright is automatic. In other words, as soon as the image is created, it's copyrighted. It's typically owned by the author, but if that author is doing work on behalf of an employer, then the employer would own it. Copyright can also be assigned to others. It doesn't have to have a copyright logo, nor does it have to be registered, although there are some benefits to registration. The laws of the country where the image is being used are the laws that apply. If you're wondering if you could be tracked down if you violate a copyright, yes, you can. Google Images is one way of tracking down who uses an image on the internet. Digital fingerprints is another method. And the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, that allows authors of images to be able to demand that material is taken off a US website. There's other applications out there too. TinEye, PicScout, Pixie, those are different ways of helping you track down possible copyright infringement. But it's ultimately the owner of the copyright that has to track down the violations. And typically you don't have to take somebody to court. You would just order a cease and desist order, and most people do comply and they remove it. So the scope of the copyright, well, it's more than I just have here. This is just what I'm talking about. I'm only talking about paintings, illustrations, drawings, cartoons, maps, photographs, sculptures, plans, and even tattoos. But the scope is also about video and text and things. Again, this is just limited in the scope of what I'm covering. I just want to also identify there's a difference between plagiarism and copyright. Plagiarism is about not acknowledging the ideas, plots, and facts of others, and it's an ethical issue. Copyright, however, is about the use of that work, and it's a legal issue. This is something that you could end up in court if you misuse copyrighted material. So how do you comply? Well, first of all, you confirm who the owner is, and then you also identify the rights that are needed. In other words, how did you want to use it? Then you secure permission to do that. You may have to purchase the use, and then you also have to comply with any conditions that are stated by the owner. If you purchase it from a third party, you should also look for indemnification. In other words, legal protection that you did purchase this properly, and you do have the right to actually use it. There's other ways as well too. There's something called fair use and fair dealings I'll talk about in a couple minutes. Material can also be in the public domain, and again I'll cover that. Creative Commons is another way to be able to use material. So copyright, that's covered under the Berne Convention, and that's the closest thing we have to an international copyright law. Essentially, if the work can be fixed in a tangible form, it does not have to be registered. And what it states is any countries that belong to the Berne Convention, and I believe there's about 179 of them, the laws of that country where the infringement took place, that copyright owner, they will have the same rights as a national of that country. So in other words, if you created material in the US, but it's being used in Spain, and if Spain is part of the Berne Convention, then that US author would have the same rights as somebody in Spain as a national. So whatever laws they have, you would have those same laws or same rights. Fair use or fair dealings. First of all, what it's not. It's not the free use of material or images. You don't just simply just say, this is where you got it from, or, here's the author, and then you can go and use it. It needs to be for a specific purpose. At least in Canada, it has to be used for research, private study, criticism, review, news reporting. And if you're not sure and you can specify how you're going to be using it, you should be talking to a copyright expert to find out if you can use it. When it comes to educational use, the Canadian guidelines, basically the institute has to be a non-commercial educational institute. If you're doing an online course, it should be password protected and it's campus restricted network. So only those persons that are essentially signed up for the course can actually access that material. If you wanted to use an entire image, you can only do that in a classroom. And if you want to use that in an exam, if it's not readily commercially available, then you can use it. You can also use single images from a compilation of images. In other words, a coffee table book. Or you can use up to 10% of a standalone image. 15 photos or 10%, whichever is less, of a source as well. One entire artistic work from a publication with other works is also permitted. If you're at an educational institute, you should actually check the guidelines for your location and make sure you follow those. So there's also something called non-commercial use, and it's the use of copyright material. And again, in Canada, it only applies to research, private study, criticism, news reporting, education, parody, and satire. They do have one provision, though. It's called mashup, or U2 provision. And it's about creating new work from original copyrighted material. And it must be non-commercial use. And the original source must be referenced, and that original source must be non-infringing in the first place. And it can't have any substantial adverse financial effect on the existing work, and it can't replace the existing work. In the US, it's called US fair use. Now, this is really a gray area, and it's a case-by-case situation. And it can be applied to things outside the scope of what's allowed in Canada. For instance, it can be applied to art. But what needs to happen is the original work has to be substantially transformed, aesthetic and function. And when they're actually looking at it in court to see if it's okay, the other things they consider is if the original or the new work is commercial in nature. So you really have to be careful if you're doing that in the US. There's also something called Technology Protection Measures, TPM. Bill C-11 in Canada that defines two different types of TPM. There's copy control TPM and access control TPM. So you're not permitted to circumvent any access control TPM. So in other words, if there's copyrighted material and you have to essentially pay for it to be able to use it, you can't circumvent that system, the technology used to do that. You have to actually pay for it. But you can circumvent copy control TPM if you're going to be using the material, it's consistent with the Bill C-11 educational purposes. So in other words, if you have proper right to use that material because of it's an educational institute, somebody can't stop you doing it by putting some technology controls. You're allowed to circumvent that. So Creative Commons, what's that all about? That's the most common method to find images out there. There's different licenses. There's 6 licenses. One, the first one, CC BY. Basically, you can end up using image for a number of different purposes. You can distribute it, remix it, build upon it. You can use it for both commercial and non-commercial uses, but you must acknowledge the creator. And that's what that license is, CC BY. There's also the CC BY SA, and that's called shared alike. And so again, you're allowed to use derivatives, commercial and non-commercial use in that. But what you have to do is you have to use the same license. So you must, whatever you create, you must use the SA, so shared alike. So you can't go and change that. You have to let anybody else be able to use your work as well too. There's also CC BY ND, so that's no derivatives, so it must be used whole. So you can't use just part of it and use part of an image and modify it. So you have to use the image as it is, but you can use it for commercial use. There's also non-commercial use, so that's NC. and the combinations NC and SA, so that's non-commercial and share alike. There's NC and ND. That's probably the most restrictive licenses. That's where it's non-commercial and no derivatives, so you have to use it exactly as is. So how do you acknowledge the author? Well, the best practice is, first of all, is you should credit the creator. You should provide a title for the work, whatever it's called. You should also provide the URL where it was hosted, so somebody can go there and see it where it is. You should state the type of license, so if it's a CC BY NC, you should state that. You keep intact the copyright notice associated with the work, so in other words, the information on how you can actually use that image. If it's created from a derivative, you should identify the original work as well. There's also another thing called a CC0 tool, Creative Commons Zero tool, and it allows a licensor to waive all rights and place the work in the public domain. So if they want to have no control over their work, there is a method of doing that. And that image, it would have the CC0, which means no rights reserved. So the public domain, well, the bottom one there says public domain dedication, and that's where that CC0 license comes in. So somebody's taken something, created it, used that tool, and issued it with the CC0, no rights reserved license. Then there's also the public domain work. Work that's done by government in the US, that information's in the public domain and you can just use it. However, if that work was done on behalf of the government, so it was a private contractor or somebody else that did the work, that would be copyright protected. So you have to be careful who actually did the work. Then copyrights also expire. They're not there forever. The expiration in Canada, it's life of the author plus 50 years, and at the end of the calendar year. So let's say that a person dies in November, 50 years later, on November, you have to go still to the end of the calendar year, and then it's expired, and the work is considered in the public domain, and anybody can use it. I mentioned it's the life of the author, not the owner. So even if you were an employee of somebody, or if it was transferred to somebody else, the actual public domain is based on the life of the author, the person that created the material. Another thing, copyright can't be extended. Crown documents just based on the published date, and then it's 50 years after the published date. You have to note, though, in the US it's different. It's 75 years, so it's life plus 75 years. And again, this doesn't apply to everything that's copyrighted in Canada either. For instance, sound, that also has the life of the author plus 75 years, and then at the end of the calendar year. So now that you've heard all the requirements, now what do? Well, if you want to find some images, I'd recommend searching Google and just using the usage rights. So there's a way to actually say that you're looking for Creative Commons licenses or something, and search for material. You can also use Microsoft Bing and look for a license type. But you still have to confirm that it's correct before. So they don't make any guarantees. If something comes up and it says it's Creative Commons, it may in fact actually be copyrighted, so you actually still have to check. There's also some sources that you can go to. Flickr and Wikimedia Commons, those are places where quite often Creative Commons images can be found. There's also free digital photos, and there you can get free photos. And if you want to upgrade with the quality or the size of the photo, then you may have to pay. There's also free images, and they have different agreements. Even some of them have the CC0 associated with it. Shutterfly.com, and those are mostly copyrighted, and you just pay for use. But again, you're only using it. You don't have the rights to do anything, so it's not yours. You're just paying for the use, and so you have to comply with their agreement. So whatever they say or how you can use it, that's how you have to use it. There's Pix4Learning, that's free for educators. iStock, some licenses expire, so there's an end date. So it has to be used within a certain period of time, or may not be able to be used for after a certain period of time. New York Public Library, they have different rights and restrictions. Cartoons, there's a couple of places to get those, Kaggle.com or Universal uClick. And those rules vary, and it really actually varies on the type of cartoon and who actually is the owner. So you have to follow that. Vancouver Community College Library, they even have something for the students and faculty, but it has to be for educational and non-commercial use. There's lots of places to find images, but some of the tips that you should follow is one, if you look at it, you should ask some questions. And this came from the Visual Community Guy. It's an infographic. He suggests take the photo yourself, use Creative Commons or purchase it, get the permissions received. Did you link instead of embed? So if you actually have a Moodle or something, even a blog, it's better to actually just to link to something rather than embed it. And you should not redistribute social media, because all those items that somebody just took a photo, they're the owner. So the other thing too is you should assume all Google searches are copyrighted material. So even if you do check it under usage rights or a different license, you need to verify that yourself. You should link and attribute instead of embedding. That's the preferred way to do it. Take your own photo again. Use Creative Commons and follow the conditions. Buy from stock, but again, follow the conditions. Get a guarantee and permission from the owner. The guarantee and permission is you're guaranteeing that they are in fact the owner, and then get the rights to use it and how to use it. You have a Moodle, here's some of the things to think about. Why link in the Moodle? Well, first of all, it avoids the copyright violation if you just link to the original image. Also, compliance with subscription terms. So sometimes it's the library that has the subscriptions, and that's a better way of actually complying with it. Plus, the data use is known, so the altmetric, that's the image reach. So the owner of the image, they actually know how far it's reaching and who's using it. They're able to see that. If you actually have it embedded in your Moodle, then they don't know what the reach of that image is. Plus, it's also less storage space. So that pretty much summarizes what I have here about copyright with regard to images. The students that contributed to this glossary, these are the ones that have been registered in the course. And some of the links and resources that they used and identified